Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. This video marks the beginning of a new series. It's going to be the second installment of my Introduction to Methods of Qualitative Research. I've actually done three. This is going to be the third installment. The first installment was Introduction to, it was the exact same title, Introduction to Methods of Qualitative Research. The second was about the ethics of qualitative research, and now this is another installment, so it's really the third, but for whatever reasons I have in my head, I decided to label it the second. There's probably already roughly about maybe 15-ish hours, 15 to 20 hours up already between the first two installments. This one should be probably about 20 hours in and of itself. What I'm going to do after the last video is posted, hopefully I can complete this 20-hour upload in the next, I don't know, 7 to 10 days from the date of the first video going up. Hopefully I'll have about 40 hours, 40 consecutive hours of qualitative methods research discussion, which is substantial. Again, the idea of me doing it is to facilitate you in your development as an academic. So these videos are intended for graduate students specifically, and with respect to qualitative methods research, graduate students interested in understanding a little bit more breadth, substantially more breadth, of how to use different methodological approaches, any type of application distinctions and sort of theory and such. So we're going to talk about all of that throughout the series. I don't want to belabor the point. If you want to access the notes, please download them, print them, follow along. Just click the link in the description field. It'll take you to the notes. The notes are complete, and you'll be able to coordinate the notes with each video because I upload sections in one batch, right? So it'll just be one section, and then the next batch will be the next section, and so on. So it should be easy to navigate. Again, all of the top of the PDF, all of the existing links, just click those links if you want to get caught up. And with that, we'll begin. There really isn't much more to say. So this is going to be Intro to Methods of Qualitative Research. Okay, and this is section 1.0. Okay. What I'm going to do in this first section is we're going to look at Derrida's deconstruction. I'm not going to explain necessarily what deconstruction is. This is a class about deconstruction. If you want to have a better understanding of what deconstruction is, please read Derrida. Or I'm sure other people have posted videos on, Derrida's deconstruction. Watch those videos on deconstruction. Read Derrida himself so that you have an understanding. This discussion on the application of deconstruction to qualitative methodologies presupposes that you have a baseline understanding of what deconstruction is. I'm going to reference some of the concepts that are seminal to Derrida's discourse on deconstruction as a method, in quotes. You'll understand what that means in a little bit, and we'll go from there. So again, I'm not going to do too much preliminary sort of discussion. This lecture series presupposes that you have a rather advanced standing both in qualitative methodologies and also in the various theories. What I imagine the way that students will use this is they'll see the appropriate theoretical paradigm being applied to qualitative methodologies, and they'll just jump to that section. Oh, I'm really interested in deconstruction, so I'll use that. Or I'm interested in Judith Butler, who's part of this. I'm really interested in Butler's work, and I want to see how I could use Butler to apply it. So I'm not going to watch the rest of the series. I'm just going to begin with the section that's on Butler. The more I do these videos, is the better organized I get, and I'm already tremendously organized, but you can always be more organized. So now it'll be more efficient, right? Now you can watch those segments that just pertain, and the video lectures, since they're up in block by section, you can just correspond what you're interested in the notes directly to the section sort of defined in the videos. So it's even more simpler than it was before. So general disclaimer, this lecture series is presented as a more advanced level as it presupposes basic understanding of general theoretical paradigms. So make sure you already have some general assumptions. I usually do what I call ghetto philosophy, not to be pejorative. I mean, covered in tats, I'm pretty ghetto myself. In terms of ghetto philosophy, it's a rudimentary, very colloquial, allegorical, metaphorical discussion of stuff. I talk about contemporary stuff, I talk about movies, I talk about cinema, film, politics, contemporary stuff. And it might seem that it's a tangent. Nothing about what I'm doing is tangential. This takes a tremendous amount of effort, a tremendous amount of planning, a tremendous amount of my labor and time to put these videos up. So even when I'm freestyling, it's not tangential. What it is to situate a basic understanding of a rather complex theoretical paradigm, and thus once I sense that you, despite the fact that we're not having feedback, but I've been doing this for years, once I sense that you should have an understanding of what I'm saying, then I'll complicate the template. The template remains the same. I just add jargon, I add technical discussions and such. And this is how it's going to progress. One last bit before I really get started. Since this is a qualitative methodology, at each instant that I have the opportunity, in the notes I have it labeled explicitly where it'll say qualitative application. You want to take note of that, because I'm going to take what I just discussed and apply it to qualitative methodologies to facilitate your research and your data interpretation or your data collection or what have you. Also, what I'll do is, independent to that, when I just feel a need, once I feel the prompt myself, I'll give you, I'll discuss how to apply this. Okay, so the goal of this section is to understand data interpretation through the deconstructivist lens, right? So the application of deconstruction to qualitative methodologies. So let's talk about the event. Right? So the nature of the event in deconstruction. So bullet point number 1, bottom of page 1. The event, not concerned with the event, but the quote-unquote actual happenings that jars. The actual happenings that jars. And the question is to ask ourselves, what do we mean by the actual happenings that jar? And you can think of this, the first person that always comes to my head anytime I read this, and it's not explicit, and it's not referenced in the text at all, but it's a good, again, sort of introductory, sort of ghetto philosophy, just a little bit, explanation of how this applies. Joseph Campbell has an amazing discussion on sort of the event that jars, right? The point is the actual happenings that jar. And with respect to these happenings, you can imagine that we go through our daily lives, and in terms of our daily progress, we are a bit anesthetized, if you will. We're a bit sort of focused on what we're doing. I'm driving to work, so that's what I do. Go in the car, start the car, drive this path, get to the job, right? But there's so much that we miss. There's so much that we miss because of this routine, because of this regularity, this, if you will, everydayness. And the question becomes, and Joseph Campbell does this best, he says, imagine that you're in New York, and amidst all the skyscrapers and, the McDonald's buildings and, the lavish apartments and such, there is still preserved, like a 14th or 15th century cathedral in New York, like in the smack dab center of the city. And you're not from New York, so this might be your first visit, so you're walking down the blocks, and you sort of become immune to the regularity. No matter how amazing it is, you will, eventually become sort of immune to the regularity of skyscrapers and such. And then, amidst all these skyscrapers and amidst all of this technological, architectural, contemporary design, whack! The cathedral's there, right? 14th, 15th century cathedral pops out. It pops out at you. It demands, if you will, your attention. We recognize this easily when it's an audible cue, right? When it's an audible cue, it's obvious. You're in a very quiet place. You can imagine you're at a concert, you're watching an opera, you're watching in the cinema, you're at the movies, and someone sneezes. That grabs your attention. Very sort of superficial, super ghetto design, really basic, but the idea is just to situate the template, and you see you should understand that, right? The idea is I am doing my regular thing and I'm not paying attention to the external environment per se. I'm not paying attention to myself. I'm just in the middle of my routine. And then all of a sudden, something calls my attention. There's something there that jumps out at me and causes me to recognize that something's happening. Something's occurring now, and I need to pay attention to this happening. So, number one is that, right? It's the actual happening that jars. And I think that was a pretty clear explanation. Number two, the process of deconstruction is always already happening. Deconstruction is itself always already happening. That is, deconstruction, serves as a primer for self-realization and concept recognition. That is, the emergence of new concepts. Okay, this is a little bit deeper. So, what do we mean? So, you can imagine that we are born into, right? This is us being born into, right? And we are born into a society, right? So we're born into, and I'll just name a few things, right? A, we're born into a society. 2, B, we're born into a political order. 3, obviously, we're born into a linguistic, L-I-N-G-U-I, a linguistic community. 4, I went A, B, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, excuse me, C, D, this will be the last one, a religious community. Right? So, we're born into a society, we're born into a political order, a linguistic community, religious community, and such, right? These things are already happening, right? They're always already. They're always already happening. The existence of these things, right, the existence of language, the existence of religion, the existence of, I didn't put culture, but culture and such, all of these things exist before us, right? They have preceded our existence, and they will also proceed our existence. So we are born into this happening. And obviously they affect us. Where you are born affects who you are as a person. It affects how you think. The language, the geographical location of your birth will affect the religious beliefs that you have. It will, or not. It will affect the language that you speak, the culture and the practices and the political order, and on and on and on. Always already, right? So you get an idea of the always already. The question then is to ask, how is it that this given, if you will, so you can call this the always already, the given, right? The question is to ask ourselves, how does this given, right? How does this always already, this immersive experience, if you will, right? The world is the condition in which we immerse ourselves in experience. Experience is here waiting for new subjects. And later, I'll get to that, right? That's substantially later. I don't want to jump ahead too much. But the idea is, it's there, right? The world with these 4 characteristics precedes us. Simple. Now, with respect to the happenings and the effect of the happening in terms of our concept formation, what I want to do is to make this applicable. And the question is, how do we make sense of sort of the distinction between the routine and then a break from the routine? It's a little bit deeper, but still rather superficial. I haven't gotten to technical stuff yet, but you can see now that it's exactly the same sort of paradigm. Before we were talking about walking down the street, you see sort of regularity in contemporary architecture, and then architecture from, a foregone century pops out at you and you take notice of it. You stop what you're doing to take notice of it. That effect. Now, what we're going to do is look at the nature in which the individual, given his or her daily experience, his or her daily life, recognizes that there were events that preceded him or her, and she's born into these immersive experience, these immersive experiences. How do we make sense of this, right? So, in preparation for this, I thought about an example that would apply appropriately, and it is the concept social determination. And those in the criminal justice system will know well about social determination. So this would apply specifically to graduate students, possibly writing their PhD on some aspect of the criminal justice system, and this concept isn't just unique to the criminal justice system, but it does apply heavily to criminal justice, and the concept is social determination. I'll explain it in a little bit. Right? So we're talking now about the application of this event, the recognition of the importance and the happening of the event as applied to social determination. So, okay, so you can imagine then in criminal justice there is a concept, recidivism, right? And the idea of recidivism is very, very simple. It is the perpetual, habitual incarceration of an individual. Individual commits a crime, individual gets locked up, serves his or her time, goes back out into the street, breaks the law again, gets back in jail, and this becomes sort of a lifestyle, unfortunately, right? This is a fact of many people, right? Recidivism is a huge problem. It causes economic strain and blah, 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 right? Rehabilitation efforts are compromised by recidivism and such, and the question might be, this gets a little bit more technical. I told you we get to the jargon now, right? So now we've moved away from the ghetto philosophy, and I won't, because some of you, this might be the first time you're watching me, so from now on, I won't show you that I'm making transition. You'll just have to sense it. But the template is exactly still the same. What I'm going to do is show you how social determination applies to this concept of the always already, and how we can talk about events that preceded and proceeded the individual. The individual is born into a specific community. It affects him or her. They become anesthetized, sort of routine, just sort of everydayness, and then how the individual might come out of this sort of this coma, if you will, mental coma. All right, so in terms of the application of social determination, what we're going to do is think about exactly the same template, but now talk about it in terms of social determination. So you can imagine that you're a young boy, and your uncles and your father and your grandfather and all of your extended friends have been incarcerated. You live in a community. You should already have a picture of the community. You probably already have a picture of the boy. You're probably thinking a young black boy, but whatever. Black, white, doesn't really matter. Hispanic, whatever. But you can imagine the community, right? You have a sense of the community, right? He's not living in an affluent community, if this is the case, right? And you're thinking, okay, this person lives in a very impoverished community. The individual has been born into, independent to any of his own will, his own volition. We don't have control over our parents. We don't have control over the geography of our birth. And thus, he happens to be born into this situation. This situation is always already defined by crime, poverty, recidivism, habitual, generational incarceration. And the question is, let's contemplate this boy's story. Now, it's likely that the boy might, it's unlikely, but it's possible that the boy might leave, right? And he might go on to be a success. Overwhelmingly, though, statistics prove that this boy's going to have some run-in with the law, and some incarceration, right? This could be bad for the kid, right? So, of course, as social determination would sort of expect, and it would prescribe that the kid try and stay out of trouble, but it's easy to say that, well, just don't get in trouble and let's keep the kid occupied and distracted, but he falls into the trap. He falls into the penitentiary system, and he now is no longer a boy, he's a man, and he's been in and out of prison for a while. And you, as a graduate researcher, might be interested in interviewing this the story of this maybe young man, right, who's been incarcerated multiple times, in and out, in and out. So, in a stint out of prison, you approach him. This is part of your project. Why? Because it would be harder to interview prisoners in jail. They're members, obviously, of a protected population. And it's not that you can't get IRB internal review board. It's not that you can't get IRB approval for interviewing prisoners. It's just really, really difficult. So you would imagine that you're going to wait until, or the pool of participants that you're interested in are those who have recently left prison, but who have been incarcerated for any number of time. That's the pool that you'll be selecting from. And you're going to have your qualitative interview with him. Obviously, the data that you're collecting in qualitative methodologies, and anytime I refer to data in this entire lecture series, I'm not talking about empirical statistical data. We're not doing mixed methodologies in this lecture series. We're not doing quantitative analysis in this series. What we're talking about is qualitative analysis, and thus the data will be the transcription, right? The notes that you have transcribed verbatim from the participant's testimony, interview, what have you, and now you are in the comfort of your office, in the library, wherever you, in the Carrel. I was in the Carrel for years. In the Carrel, in the library, on some random floor, reading the material that you've collected, just to be clear. So I think the picture's clear. The question is then, so now that we understand how social determination sort of fits this category, we see how it does, right? What's determined? What we're saying is that social determination is probably going to be able to make predictions on the boy's behavior, right? It's going to make predictions on the likelihood that he's going to experience multiple recurrent incarceration. And the question is to ask the young man who's been released a question that could possibly jar him. You don't want to force the point because there are ethics involved, but you can imagine that you would create a questionnaire. And the questionnaire might say something along the lines of, have you been, incarcerated frequently? Yes, no, blah, blah, blah. How many times? And you would look for those people in your sample set who've been, let's just say, incarcerated in and out of prison at least 4 times, like 4 arrests. And you might even get more specific. The person is out now and you ask the person, hey, do you see yourself being incarcerated in the next, and then you sort of demarcate it, right? 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. Do you see yourself never again? And, the participant bubbles in what he or she believes, right? I feel like I'm never going to be incarcerated again. If the participant says, knows him or his or her own nature, says, 3 months, 6 months, what you're going to be able to do is to go back and make assessments based on what the person believed, right? And so this is important, right? You have an initial state of affairs, and this applies to the event, right? And I just want to give you a real sense of how to apply this, right? In the happening, this sort of, as we said, if we look back at number 1, the actual happening that jars, something that jars. The question is, how do we apply this to qualitative data? How do I find something that jars in qualitative data? I'm giving you an example now, a concrete application of this. Granted, it's just a criminal justice, because I don't have the time to give, I couldn't give applications to any number, so I've selected one. So you come back to the participant, and you say to the participant, let's say participant believes he's going to be incarcerated in 6 months, and you ask the participant, time has passed, and the participant hasn't been incarcerated. Let's say 6 months, a year later. You're still not incarcerated. Remember I did that thing with you, and you said a year ago that you believed you would be incarcerated after 6 months, and here it is a year, and you still haven't been locked up. Like, what happened? Right? I didn't write happen on the board, right? The happening. What happened? What happened? It sounds like such a trivial question. It sounds so sort of fanciful. Like, it doesn't feel substantial. And that's a problem I think a lot of graduate students have, is that they believe that real rigorous academic work has to be complicated. It has to be difficult. It has to be something tedious. And it's not true. A very basic question like what happened can lead to really, really profound insight. With respect to deconstruction, it's important that you understand. So I'll give you a little bit of background on deconstruction, despite the fact that this presupposes that you already understand deconstruction. Formally, deconstruction is not a methodology. Deconstruction does not have, it's not systematized. There aren't phases in deconstruction, like phase 1 you do this, phase 2 you do this, phase 3 you do this. There aren't procedures in deconstruction. Deconstruction is very discomforting for most graduate students the first time they start to have an inclination into what Derrida means in it. And just when you think, even for professional academics, just when you think you know what deconstruction means, someone can change the nature of its meaning, because it isn't a system. It isn't defined by formal rules other than the following. In a deconstructivist approach, it's about the individual recognizing his or her existence in relationship to all the paradoxes of our existence. And if you're scratching your head like, what the hell does that mean? Recognizing our existence in relation to all the paradoxes of our existence, like what does that mean? Well, Heidegger asked this best, and this is why I don't want to go too far off, because this will really take me into philosophy and off of this topic. Heidegger asked the million-dollar question, why is there something rather than nothing? This really is a much older question from Heraclitus. But the idea is, why is there something, right? The term for this, just a quick side note, it's called ex nihilo. Right? Out of nothing. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why are we even here? And the insight that Derrida most geniusly arrived at is that there is a sense of impossibility. There's a sense of paradox. There's a sense of confusion that we tend to run away from. When we broach something that we just can't make sense of, we leave and we flee it so that we can go back to an organized system. And you are looking at the person who loves organization and systems. That's my thing. I do appreciate Derrida because he recognized that our inclination is to flee when we can't make sense of something. And what deconstruction, in the really gross generalization, boils down to is the willingness to remain in a state of perpetual flux. And I mean that, to stay in a state of perpetual flux. That's the deconstructivist mode. And it's not even a mode, but it's the deconstructivist approach. So that there aren't going to be definitive rights, definitive wrongs. There isn't going to be a specific methodology with which you can apply. What Derrida does is he identifies individual concepts, right? Not theories, individual concepts. And you'll see some of these concepts in a bit, genius concepts. You know, a piece of, I have this in my office on the wall, you can't see this, but a piece of fabric that refuses to lay flat. Something as simple as that, right? The piece of fabric that won't play along with the rest of the fabric and sort of, you know, it's a loose end as a concept. And recognize that the individual in his or her experience is not going to be able to have all the questions as to why he does what he does, why she does what she does. I don't know why I keep getting incarcerated. I don't know why I keep finding myself, you know, in the middle of the projects doing heroin, doing coke, doing any number of drugs. I don't know why I can't stop drinking. I don't know why, right? It's not always appropriate, right? And I have to contextualize this because I recognize that a lot of people have benefited from like 12-step programs and such. But the idea is it's not always appropriate for every individual to go through some formulaic, procedural, generalizable process to arrive at self-realization, to arrive at a concept of who they are. And in terms of another application of the deconstructivist model, deconstructivist, aside from the criminal justice story that I was giving you, and I still need to finish up explaining, would also apply neatly to sort of recovery, right? The idea of recovery. Individual people go about their recovery for themselves, and sometimes they just can't articulate how and why they were able to do it, right? Everything can't be tidied into a nice, neat, organized folder and then commodified for the masses. Sometimes it's uniquely for that person, and this makes great qualitative analysis. So to tidy up the application, and I hope this is, you know, clear. If it feels like it's a little bit confusing, then I'm doing my job, because it's Derrida. And I don't mean that facetiously. It's not supposed to be perfectly understandable, right? It's not supposed to be perfectly explained. It should feel a bit discomforting. Why? Because we're talking about the happening and the narratives of individuals, and they themselves won't always have full epistemic understanding of the totality of their experiences. I can't tell you. I can't tell you why I made the change. Maybe I can a little bit. So you might ask the convict, you know, like, like, okay, you haven't been incarcerated for 6 months. I mean, you're 6 months over your threshold. You thought you were going to be back in for 6 months. It's a year later. You're not incarcerated. What happened? What happened? He might say, I don't know. I don't know. I can't explain it. He might tell you what you would expect, right? I changed my friends. I stopped doing drugs. I tried to get a job. Blah, blah, blah. I stayed occupied. I stayed busy. Blah, blah, blah. He might have a clear understanding. But the idea is to find that moment. For some people, it's even as specific as a moment. Find that instance, that moment where something popped out at them. You know, I just realized then I had to stop. I came home, I opened the door, I saw my kids' face, and they hadn't seen me in months, and they probably didn't expect to see me for a long time, and they were indifferent when they saw me. I thought they would run and jump into my arms, and I thought everybody would be happy to see me, and they saw me, and it was just a look of indifference. Can you imagine? I mean, that's an experience that would jar you. You have an expectation of what's going to happen. You think it's going to be just a regular routine. I keep on getting incarcerated. I come out. The kids are happy to see me. I say, hey kids, oh, Dad's back home, yay. You expect that to be the same. You expect them to be the same, and then all of a sudden, whack! You open up the door, and it's like, oh yeah, hey, what's up? Yeah. Wow. Because they became habituated to your routine, and as such, that jarred the participant. It was then that I realized. It's something as subtle as that. Why? Because there's a lot that can be deconstructed from that event, right? From just the gaze from his children. I'm going to move on because this is going to be a super long series if I continue at this pace, but it's important that I make these concepts clear. It was an expectation. It was unjustified, right? He had an unjustified expectation. He was assuming that things would be the same, and when they weren't, it was the fact that things had changed that jarred him back into this new experience. It changed the event of his homecoming, right? The event of his homecoming was substantially different. Why? Because he didn't receive what he thought he would. His expectations were thwarted. And that is a gem for you, right? Because I'm going to stop here and move on, but I want you, if you're interested in anything that I've just said, some people will, some people won't, but if you are interested in what I've said, I want you to think about that, right? I want you to take some time after you've watched this segment, write expectations down in your notes, and think about how expectations frame our minds in such a way. I can explain this, but I don't have the time. How expectations frame our mind in such a way, they habituate our mind such that we don't recognize, we don't allow ourselves to recognize signals that might be important in us actualizing our fullest potential, right? That's very complicated, right? So think about that, right? And if you need to rewind the video to sort of internalize what I said again, then do so, but I need to move on. Okay, so number 3, qualitative application. So for example, the criminal justice researcher, the notion of social determination, I talked about that, generational grievances, socio-religious interstate conflict, So this picture is an example of sort of the always already. There is this state of affairs X, let's say some of these criteria, they predate the existence of the person. The person is born into that state of affair. After the person dies, that state of affairs persists. So, I mean, you have a general idea. Okay. So the event is important. There's so much more that I could talk about with respect to the event, but again, this is not a lecture series on Derrida. This is not a lecture series on deconstruction. You need to read that yourself. You need to have a full understanding yourself. If you've read, if you have an understanding, this will definitely buttress your existing content information, because you can already see how these given conditions, social fabric, our linguistic community, our religious community, our political order, society itself predates us, and it shapes us. And in terms of it shaping us, individuals begin to have a routine, a daily sort of almost an almost coma-induced everydayness. You just go about your routine. And insofar as you do that, you, in that state, place expectations on others. You place expectations on your environment. You also place expectations on yourself. And it's when those expectations on your environment and the others change that something transforms about this. This event is no longer what I thought it would be. I used to love to go to clubs. I used to love to dance. I used to love the rave. I used to love to, I used to love to stay up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And then things changed. I might be able to articulate it properly, and if so, that's okay. That counts as the event. I might not be able to articulate it. I might not be able to identify it. It might still be gray. And I don't go at all, and that's okay. The deconstructivist approach doesn't say that you have to know. Right? Every individual participant is going to have a unique story that is specific to his or her experience, and what we are looking to do is to collect the range, the diversity of stories, the diversity of narratives with respect to any number of experiences. And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for a gradation. We're not looking to impose one seminal form on everyone's experience as much as we are trying to have a better understanding of what it is, and this sounds so hokey, but I love this type of stuff, right? A better understanding of what it is to be a human being. And to be a human being is something very, very complex. The ranges of experiences are very, very, very broad. And it's more about understanding the nuances, the subtleties, than it is about imposing definitive criteria, definitive explanation. Deconstruction isn't about that. So if you're looking to flee definitive explanations, totalizing, homogenizing theoretical paradigms, this is definitely this is for you. This is for you. Okay, so to move on, this is the top of page 2. This is the trace. So the next concept, so we did the concept, the event, and I'll tie these in. The first concept we did was the event. The next concept is the trace. So the full comprehension of this section will require an understanding of semiotics. So I've already done a semiotics lecture series, and I apologize, right? It's a lot. The more advanced you get in knowledge, in learning, in academia, especially someone like myself who's past, I'm post PhD, and I do this for a living. A lot of the concepts are intertwined. So it does get a bit difficult if you're a new student to have sort of the prerequisite knowledge to make sense of some of this stuff, and I recognize this. I'm certain it's unlikely if anyone is going to say, hey, he said I should stop right here, watch his 16-hour video series on freaking semiotics, or maybe 12 hours on semiotics, and then come back. I doubt any of you will do that. I encourage you to, if you have the time. It would make your understanding of this that much deeper. So what I'll try to do is to explain as best as I can without belaboring semiotics how the two are sort of intertwined, right? We're going to look at a deconstructivist approach as it applies to semiotics, and then use that in terms of our data interpretation and our qualitative methodology, right? And the concept is the trace. So number 1, page 2, the condition of thought and experience, right? The condition of thought and experience. And number 2, the qualitative application immediately is, how did we come to know X? It's the condition of thought. How did you come to know X? Is indebted to the conceptual approach, right? It is a sense in which I have an impression, right? I don't have full knowledge, but I have an impression. Let's read number 2 again, right? How did you come to know X is indebted to this conceptual approach. Now, in terms of the trace, you can imagine that you are, and in terms of the examples, I come up with the examples on the fly, right? I leave a lot of this to, sort of me doing this freestyle. I have the notes, I have an understanding, I've read Derrida, I know how this applies. So I'll try and make sure that I'm make my examples diversified, so I'm not going back to just one paradigm. You know, it's not always going to be criminal justice examples. I'll give you a breadth of examples. So the example that immediately came into my mind had to do with educational theory. Right? So you can imagine that you're an educational theorist. You're writing your dissertation on some aspect of educational theory and knowledge acquisition, maybe in, you know, K through 12 students, blah, 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 something along those lines, like how students come to learn information, come to process information, the diversity of the ways in which students come to learn, come to understand, and there's any number of theoretical paradigms that apply to this. I think a lot of these theoretical paradigms, Derrida would feel that it was like, you know, nails on a chalkboard, right? So you might say, oh, well, there's multiple intelligences, right? So you have multiple intelligences, and there's 7 of them, and it goes like this. And you know, you have different types of learning, right? You have your tactile sensibility, you have your visual learner, you have your, and there's 8 of those, and there's 6 of these, and there's 5 of those, and there's 2 of these, and there's, this is how people learn. And it's not that Derrida wouldn't agree. It's not that the deconstructivist would deny the fact. But is there an alternative approach to this? And this might seem too touchy-feely for you, but the idea of a trace is that I have a sense. It's an intuition. It's an intuitive approach, right? The trace, one aspect of it, the trace is that it's intuitive. It's the gut. It's the gut. It's an intuitive approach. This might not apply. You might not be able to cultivate a deconstructivist approach to, potentially deconstructivist approach to educational theory for one specific reason, the theory part in educational theory. You might be able to pull this off in a Montessori school though, right? You might be able to really use and implement a deconstructivist approach to education in a Montessori school where you have a lot more flexibility than you do in sort of a regular public school. Not to dissuade people from public schools, because that's why I'm doing this sort of qualitative application now. The question is, how might it look? How might using trace apply to meeting educational goals, identifying knowledge acquisition in an individual? Now, quick side note, I don't want to spend too much time on this. Me, myself, I'm a non-traditional learner. I don't learn like everybody, oh, you're a visual and you do this, or you're a tactical, you do this, you're kinesthetic, you do this, and this is how you learn this, and you know, it's because you're very emotionally connected, and that's the way in which you're multiple intelligence, da-da-da, you know, you're very problem-solving, sort of macro-level, all-encompassing explanation, which is good, not to knock theorists who've developed this, but a lot of it is intuition. I can't quite explain it. I don't know how I'm able to, this is me now. This is Dr. Jason J. Campbell telling you as a fact. Right? No one can deny this because this is my life. I can't always explain how I'm able to do what I'm able to do and how I'm able to think of and identify some of the things that I'm able to do it, other than, well, you know, I had formal logic training and I think that just changed the way my brain works. But I don't know that that's true. I can't quite explain it. So you can imagine that students are given a problem. First thing that comes to my head, Legos. Right? You get Legos and a tub of them, and you ask the children to build structures. And what you do is you present the image of the structure as a reference. You can imagine that you do problem solving, not problem solving, it's puzzles. My son, when he was little, he loved solving puzzles, right? And you know, we stopped doing that because he was solving 1,000-piece puzzles. This is not to brag, this is true. He was solving, you know, 1,000-piece puzzles by the time he was like 5 or 7. So we're off to puzzles or something different, right? But one thing that I recognized when I was helping him, guiding him through this process, and my daughter too, but more so my son with respect to this, one thing that I recognized as he got better at solving puzzles was that he used the reference less. He used the reference, you know, the box has the picture of the puzzle, and you use the box as a reference so that you can solve the puzzle. What would be good, what I think would be a perfect application of this intuitive approach, this sort of trace approach, is to give them the trace. Students, I am going to present you a picture of the thing that I want you to build. Everybody has exactly the same Lego box with exactly the same Lego pieces. They all sit on the floor. I'm going to show you this picture for 30 seconds. You're only going to be able to look at this picture for 30 seconds. I want you to look at the picture, and I want you to take in as much information of this picture, look at all the details, and then try and build what's in your head after you've looked at the picture to the specifications that you've seen. Okay, everybody ready? Yay! Okay, they probably explain it better. You know, I'm not a K through 12. I speak. You know, it's hard for me to communicate in that regard to young folk. So a teacher might explain that better. But you get the idea. And you present it. 30 seconds goes down. The students are looking. The students are looking. The students are looking. The students are looking, and there's nothing else. Now you're on your own. Now you're on your own. Give them an hour to do it. You know, this is why I'm saying you might not be able to do this in a public school, right? Because if there's a pressure of time there, if time constraints are there, your brain's going to be stressed and you're not going to be able to do it. So give them time. You know, take an hour, take 2 hours, and I want you to do it. And then make comparisons among the students. Oh my God, it's so dope. It would be so amazing, right? It would be so amazing. Why? Because all you have is a trace. All that exists is a trace. All the student has in order to learn from, to pull from. The reservoir of information isn't going to be pulled from some theoretical paradigm, from some structure. It's not going to be, it's going to be just a few seconds of observation, and they are going to have to reconstruct. They're going to have to be able to reconstruct something that can be verified and checked against from a few seconds of observation. That's the sense of the trace. That's what it feels like, right? To do credit to Derrida. I think a lot of people talk about this, and I've read interpretations, you know, shout out to the publishers of the book for which I'm referencing, but even that wasn't, you know, it didn't catch the crux. I studied Derrida and other French philosophers, existentialists, with a really good philosopher at my university, and you know, I got a different sense of deconstructivism, and that's the idea. The trace is that. Don't think that the knowledge that we are able to cultivate, to create, to transmit in this world is exclusively reserved to formulaic systems and traditions. It's all deductive. It's either deductive or it's inferential. It's either deductive or it's inferential. I think a lot of people fail to recognize how much of our learning is intuitive, and as such is almost specific to the individual. What I've done is I've taken my intuitive approach and I'm trying to make my personal intuitive approach sort of generalizable, which is, you know, it's blasphemy, of course. But I've done lecture series and such on that. Try to teach intuition is really difficult, but I've been working on that in the privacy of my own sort of studies for a number of years now. I haven't yet formalized it. But the idea is you get this sense of the trace. At the moment of reconstructing what you've seen, all you have to refer to is that trace, and that's the condition of thought and experience. That reference, the experience that I have, the thought that I have, and this is again as applied to qualitative methodologies. This is obviously not Derrida's conception exclusively. This is the application of trace to qualitative methodologies, not just the discussion of trace. That's not the point of this series. So number 3, the absent presence. Listen to this quote. The absent presence of something imperceptible imprints on our words and meaning before we speak or write them. Now, if you were to have read that, right? If you were to have read Derrida's Deconstructivist, the secondary account of Derrida's Deconstructivist, you'd be like, I have no idea of what that means. That should be absolutely crystal clear now, given the example, right? The absent present of something, of sometimes imperceptible imprints, right? The absent present, yeah. What's absent is the actual picture. What's present is the trace of the picture in my memory. My memory now is an imprint of what the image that I saw. And if you get really good at this, you don't need to see it for more than, 30 seconds is an infinity. I mean, you get really good at it, you can see it you challenge yourself as you get older. Right? I want like a fraction of a second, not even a second anymore. I want a fraction of a second to see if I can still process this. But I'm going to go off on a tangent. The idea is 30 seconds is an infinity. Granted, for kids, first experience to this is too quick, right? Because they're distracted and not quite focused. They don't quite understand what the experience is about. But as you do this, and I would encourage some of you, right? I would encourage some of you, because the type of people who watch my videos, I should give this type of gem like maybe 15 hours in. You can't really give this type of gem in, 50 minutes in. It's too good of a gem for so soon. But so I'm not going to give it. So I'm not going to encourage you and tell you what to say, because we're too close in. I won't forget. So randomly, hours from now, I'll make a comment and you'll take note of it. But no, too many average. The first few minutes of any video gets the highest views, and as the hours progress, you get less and less. And that's where I stuff all the gems, right? You don't put all this good stuff at the surface. You put all the good stuff after you put in some work. You don't get goodies for free. So yeah, it should make sense, right? If you have the idea of what I said in terms of the image and the reconstruction of the image based on 30-second impression of the image, this makes sense now, right? The absent presence of sometimes imperceptible, now it's fully imperceptible, it's no longer there to be perceived, imprints on our words and meanings before we speak or write them. Now, granted, the sociolinguistic semiotic application of this, since I said it was semiotic, also this might pertain to qualitative methodologists who are interested in speech therapy, right? So the speech therapist might use a variation of the same concept. So the absent presence of sometimes imperceptible imprints on our words and meaning before we speak or write them. The question is, how might it be, what might be the condition of, we know that stuttering is, some aspects of it is neurological, right? And some aspects of a stutter is based in our physiology, but we also know that stress can be a trigger as a fact, right? And I know this because I was doing some bizarre research years ago, so I just pull this from the data bank, and obviously those of you who are watching who are speech therapists will know this as a fact. You'll know far more than me. So that stress can induce a stutter. Right? If you're predisposed to stuttering and you're in a stressful environment, then the existence of stress will cause you to stutter. Right? Granted, I recognize there are individuals who stutter independent of stress, and no amount of stress will or will not induce it. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about a really sort of specific community. Those individuals who are predisposed to stuttering and sort of exemplify stuttering in states of stress. The idea is to try and help them stop stuttering or decrease the amount of stuttering by exposing them to stress so that they become sort of immune to stress, such that the presence of stress doesn't adversely affect their speech. Okay, so what is present and absent, what is both absent and present, is you can imagine the individual is exposed to, if you're doing this in like a lab experiment, the way I would sort of structure this, easy to get IRB approval, is a very sort of loud environment with like flashing lights or whatever. The person's a very, very stressful environment. The external stressors are immediately shut off, and then you have a very sort of heady conversation, and see how the person is affected by the external stressor. You can recognize that the imprints of that stress that is no longer present is still adversely affecting the way in which they talk. And I'm not trained in physiology to be able to talk about how we might overcome that and such, but you can see the correlation, right? The correlation would be a recognition that something is not present, but is present. That sort of confused state of affairs is deconstructivist 101, right? What's not present is the stress. What is present is the stress. Present is not present, stress is not present audibly, empirically, verifiably, tangibly, quantifiably. It's not there. It cannot be assessed. But the effects of stress is still there. One last example of the application: the absent presence of something imperceptible imprints on our words and our meaning before we really even speak or write them. PTSD. I mean, obviously, right? What people say. The guy's always lashing out in anger. He's saying mean stuff. He's belligerent. This is sort of a caricature, and I apologize if it comes off sort of grossly. But, he's yelling, he's saying mean stuff. Why is he saying that? There's nothing here. It's calm. Well, no, war is still in his head, right? There's still it's an absent present. It's absent empirically. You can't see what is affecting the person, but it's present for the person. He has, or she has been imprinted upon. The effect, external effect, has imprinted itself upon him or her. And the question is, how do we make sense of transforming that imprint so that what's being said isn't negative, right? So you can see, again, how this applies, right? So number 3 is really important, actually, now that I think about it. A lot comes out of this, right? The absent presence of sometimes imperceptible imprints on our words and meaning before we even speak them. Before I'm even talking, I'm affected by this, and as such, in this instance, it might come out as rage. When I really don't feel angry. When I'm really not upset. But what I'm saying is upset. What I'm saying is angry. It's displaying that. Why? Because of this. And there, again, I don't have the time. I spent already way too much time on number 3, but I wanted to, I really wanted to make this applicable. I hate giving theoretical lectures where you're speaking and it's all in the clouds. There's 3 solid examples where the trace is affecting the individual. It's absent present. It's there, but it's not there. It sounds hokey when you read it, but it means something significant, right? The deconstructivist application to qualitative methodologies is important, right? So if it feels like it's contradictory, don't run away from it. If it feels like it's uncomfortable or confusing, don't run away from it. Acclimate yourself to that. It's hard to do, but as an academic, I'm immune to discomfort. I mean, my life is in this sort of contradiction, right? So for example, slang, and yet another example, slang in urban culture regarding the use of the term cream, right, derived from the song. My example is a lot more sort of dumbed down than the 3 that I just gave, but this is yet another example, so I'll use it. Slang in urban culture regarding the use of the term cream is derived from the song CREAM as an acronym, which means cash rules everything around me. So, in terms of being born into a community, you would imagine that, okay, I'm born into the community, members of the community use the term cream, say like, hey man, I'm going to go to the grocery store, you got any cream? He's not asking you to go to the grocery store and get, whipped cream. I'm going to leave and I need some money from you, is what's being communicated, right? I'm going to the grocery store, you have any cream? So, we see, sort of in a very pedestrian sense, that what's absent in this is reference to, this is why it's semiotic, is reference to Wu-Tang, and specifically the track on, I think it was Enter the 36 Chambers, if I do say so myself, Cream. Right? There's no reference to that. There's no need to reference the track anymore because members of the community already know the reference. So this is important. And then I'm going to pause on 4 and then we'll pick back up on 5. This is very important. If there is no need for reference in terms of the... Actually, I'm going to take this a lot deeper than I thought with cream. This is insane. Right? So the term cream, if there's no need for reference, right? If there's no need for reference, there's no reference needed when I use the word cream, and a person understands the context with which cream is applied linguistically, then the context of that speech is called high context, right? This is known as high context speech. And specifically it's high context because in the communication of and in the use of this term cream, the reference is already known. For someone who's not from the ghetto, someone who doesn't know about Wu-Tang, and you say, well, man, I'm trying to stack this cream. You say, well, stack would need qualification as well, but, well, actually, no, not stack. But the idea of stacking cream is bizarre, right? We're not talking about lattes here, right? But I'm going to stack this cream, for example. If you needed explanation of what that sentence means, it's a consequence of you not understanding the relationship between the word and its referent, which is the song, Cream. If I explain what it means by referencing the song, by telling you, then it's a low context, like I'm being very literal. Oh, by the word cream, it's reference to Wu-Tang's Enter the 36 Chambers, and the song's about cream, so we just use this. Now it's very low context, it's very literal. If I'm talking to someone who's a native speaker, or someone who's, this also applies to sort of language acquisition, I'm talking to someone who's from the hood, who understands Ebonics, man, I'm about to stack that cream, they get it, no reference needed, it's high context. Why? Because there's no way for meaning to be understood without a pre-existing understanding of its referent, to be technical. I told you it gets jargon-filled the longer we go along. So I'm going to stop at this point, break for a little bit, come right back and pick up with number 5. Okay, so number 5, words have meaning. And that meaning is contingent on social construction, etc. Thus meanings change, right? The meanings of the words that we have, they change. And as such, the change in the meanings of terms change how we think about things. And this is important, right? Our thoughts are themselves nothing more than words, right? And our words are, so sort of deconstruct this, right, properly. So we have, we have thoughts. We have thoughts, but our thoughts are words, obviously, and our words are contingent on society, and society is contingent on, the words of our society are contingent on what's known as a linguistic community, and the words that the linguistic community selects and the meaning that's applied to these words are completely arbitrary. It's completely arbitrary. Right? This is one of the key insights of Saussure's semiotics. I'm not going to go into it. You can watch my lecture series if you want more of it. But the application of definitions to words, the reason that we say left in English and not some other word is completely arbitrary. Right? The meaning of left could have been any other word. Right? The meaning is as such. By left I mean a particular directionality with respect to some perspective. Right? That meaning is always what it is. It's sort of fixed, if you will. But the word that I associate with that concept to form a signification is completely arbitrary. I could use anything. Right? So the arbitrariness is it's akin to, it's not the same as, but it's akin to a deconstructivist methodology. Now this is something uniquely mine, right? This is, you're not going to be able to find this in any books anywhere, because, you know, I thought of it. Not to say that, you know, other people haven't approximated something like this, but, you know, in studying semiotics, and presenting and lecturing on semiotics, I recognize that there is a sense in which the foundation of a semiotic theory is less structured, less rudimentary, less sort of homogenizing than people think it is. It's not as clearly defined as I think many people think semiotics is, because at its base, at its root, the word is itself arbitrary. It could be anything. If we collectively agree to change the word left, not the meaning left, left will always mean left with respect to some coordinates or perspective, but we change the word, we agree that the word no longer means that, it doesn't. The example that I give in my semiotics lecture pertains to bad. When I was a kid, when DMC was huge, and not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good. They explained it to you in low context, right? Now we can get really technical. So Run DMC explains the transformation of the use of the term bad in low context by stating not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good. Thus, immediately an entire population of people knew the new interpretation of the word bad. So it's not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good, changes immediately. Right? You can see sort of varying levels of how this changed. Granted, in this example, the word was the same, they changed the meaning, they switched the reference to meaning. You can do both, right? You can keep the original meaning, change the word, keep the word, change the original meaning. All of that is socially constructed. All of that is socially constructed. Okay. So, this is 5.1 then. The word cream as signifier has historical rootedness, and thus the meaning of the term is itself historical. This part is a little bit more intricate. In terms of the use of words, words are themselves sort of like this absent presence. Right? You will watch this video. I mean, if you're like a methodical student, and shout out to all the people that watch this, students and professors alike, right? Because there wouldn't be any purpose to do it if this wasn't helping you in your studies, right? I want to give an alternative explanation. I want to give a ghetto urban explanation. I want to filter all that I've read through my lived experience and give you something different than what other professors would give. Not better or worse. I don't think I'm better or worse than any other professor. It's just that I have a different interpretation, and I think that you need a different interpretation. So in terms of this historical, and this is important, right? The historicity, the historical rootedness of this. You'll listen to the lecture, you'll write the notes down, and then, you know, I picture people not using this in classrooms as much, even though I know people do. I always picture people using my lectures as conversation starters at dinner, right? So it's like philosophy is the greatest conversation starter ever. You can talk about this stuff forever. There's no end to the amount of conversation you can have with a philosopher, because we can talk about anything. So you sit down and you're like, yeah, you know, a deconstructivist, you gotta find yourself in a position of being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. You have to find yourself in a position where having a fixed, you know, perfect, crisp, you know, Jamaican term, crisp. Some of my patois slipped out there. Having a perfect state is, you know, that's not feasible. In terms of this lecture, the lecture is no longer there. You're not watching the video anymore. You're not looking at your notes. It's still imprinting. Like, part of what I'm doing now is imprinting these ideas in your mind for any, you know, for an extended period of time. It could be a month or 2 months and then you forget it. For some of you, these the imprints might be for the rest of your life. I've had instructors who've imprinted on me from the time I know, you know, from the time I experienced them till now. So the idea is, it's not always this, you know, people always get really strong imprints are those that are violent and forceful or orgasmic, or no, sometimes it's just this. It's just like, wow, I got a new way to see the world. We can tie this back into 3, right? The absent presence of sometimes imperceptible imprints, so that we recognize now how speech can do this. I have a student now who is doing research on hate speech, and hate speech is obviously an imprint, right? You've imprinted, you've transformed the way in which someone sees the world as a consequence of the relationships that you've made. I would have never looked at things in that manner, but now that you've exposed me to this new interpretation, I can no longer see it how I used to see it. Right? The way in which I see the world has transformed. Right? That's the power of education. But unfortunately, it's also the power of indoctrination. Right? Education and indoctrination is a very, very fine line between the two. And at some points, they're almost one and the same. So it's important to recognize that in terms of the historical reference of this trace sense, the participant might not always know. You know, I watched Dr. Campbell's videos, and, you know, I don't know what it was specifically about what he said, but it just stuck. Something stuck, right? Well, what was it that stuck? Well, this little idea, da-da-da. And then from there, I just transformed that into something different. Okay, cool. You don't have a textbook cookie-cutter definition, but just like the example of the children being exposed to, you know, the stimulus for 30 seconds, and then having to reconstruct from 30 seconds worth of exposure, you can imagine, right? You can imagine that it is obviously the case that as human beings, I think in those who have various forms of like Asperger's syndrome and such, autistics, various degrees, can have not necessarily photographic memory, but an information recall based on exposure that is obscene. And this is a fact. We know that this happens in human beings. There's no question. This is a fact. The point is a recognition that we need to understand more about that fact. And from a deconstructivist approach, our knowledge is going to rest in the individual's abilities. It might be difficult to get an explanation from of the occurrence or the happening from someone who's autistic because of any number of physiological difficulties. I've actually watched a series on autism where the autistic person was presented with, I think it was like the blueprints of a city, like in a 2D line architectural drawing, and then reconstructed it to like almost like 90%, but this person was like a savant, like very brilliant level, genius level. The idea is, yeah, most of us are not going to be able to do that, but why is it that we assume in our K-12 education it's mostly going to be deductive, right? And then it's deductive, it's shaky because people aren't doing really good deductive logic, or don't even understand what that means. But our institution, our educational institution, is built on deductive logic, really shoddy, but deductive logic. Or it's to a lesser degree going to be inferential, but no one's doing intuitive. And I look at the traces as a means of preserving the intuition. I feel like, it was an hour ago that I saw the picture, but I feel like it was a red cube in this square here. And I'll check to see if it was, right, later. So, you get the idea. I don't want to belabor the point, but I really want this to apply. And I know as a fact, the first qualitative methodologies, students use that all the time. And most of the feedback I get back is either from my pedagogy of the press, which seems to resonate well, and my qualitative methodologies. And I understand the qualitative methodologies because graduate students need this. So the reason why I'm really spending a lot of time on each point is students who are interested in a deconstructivist methodology, a deconstructivist approach is probably better, as applied to qualitative methods. I want to make sure that I give you enough so that you have more than enough to work with. That's the idea. I want to saturate you with so much information that some of this you won't even need. Okay, so number 6. Simply within a qualitative interview where the occurrence of a term reoccurs, do not assume that you have an appreciation or understanding of both its use and its meaning. So what I did, I didn't even realize I did this, is I flipped this. This is good. Sort of a trace, not in terms of the participant, but traces of knowledge in terms of you, the researcher. Don't make the assumption that, yeah, I sort of know what he means by that term, right? In your use of the term, you've used this term over and over again during our interview. Make sure that you know the referent for that term. Get a low context, right? Explain to me what that means. Don't assume that you know, right? The assumption can be problematic because you can assume that it's high context and you really don't need to know the referent, when in fact you do need to know the referent and have them explain it to you in low context, right? So make sure you don't make those assumptions. So 6.1, as a researcher, you should take note of how your participant uses their words. For example, the following words: gay, lazy, Asian, punk, soft. I'll qualify Asian because I know it looks bizarre to have Asian there. How else could you use Asian? I'm going to do this in my my race lecture series, which I'm probably maybe next or after my metropolitan. I got to figure out which lecture series is up next. This is sort of a kamikaze, 4-part installment of lecture series. It's a tremendous amount of work, but I've been away from YouTube a while writing academically, so now it's time to get back and that I can indulge in my own fantasies and delusions, but not until after I get my work done. In terms of Asian, there's and I'll talk more about this in my race lecture series, which will be up sometime after this, but there's a contemporary use of the term and the idea of Asian as almost perfection, right? So level Asian means like it's the best level. It's a new use of the term Asian, and if it continues for another 5 years, 10 years, it could completely transform what we mean when we use the term Asian, because I see it subtly changing, right? No one's forcefully changing. It's not like, it's not like Run DMC is giving us a low context order, not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good. It's a consequence of any number of stuff. Pop culture and the publication of the Tiger Mom, and sort of just the idea of Tiger Mom and tiger parenting in general, and sort of that, Asian stride, that, and it's vulgar and pejorative to even say it, but, level Asian means, the best of the best. So Asian in that sense. Gay, not meaning homosexual, but meaning weak or effeminate or feeble, or you get the idea. So make sure that the words, that the words have clarification. Make sure that you understand the context in which the word is being used, right? Because what's present is the use of the term, but what's absent, again, just like the word cream, is a reference to the term. So if you think for a second that the person might be using the term in a context that you're not familiar with, don't make that assumption, because it can completely derail your interpretation of what's being said when you're processing your data later. You want to make sure that you're on record as, am I understanding you right, in your use of X, you mean Y? That's sort of the structure, right? So, excuse me, can I ask you, participant, in your use of the term X, do you mean Y? Yes, I mean Y. Okay, so when you go back to analyze the transcription, that when the participant said this, he meant that, right? So you should take the time and be cognizant of this, otherwise this is going to derail your interpretation, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. So 6.2, bottom of page 2. So best practice, researchers might ask, what does the use of the term, this is exactly what I just said, oh, this is insane. What does the use of the term X mean for you? Can you explain? This is just what I said, right? So their answer to this question provides you, the researcher, with insight to the always already, and most importantly, the social context wherein the term has meaning. This idea of the meaning of terms and the meaning of the impression of terms, right, specifically, is important. So I just want to spend a little bit of time in terms of the application of the trace. The trace, and let me change colors. So we have an event, and we have the event, let's say event X. And I have my recollection of event X. I have my recollection of event X. And there's a trace connecting my recollection. This is sort of ghetto philosophy here, right? It's not a solid line. I can't quite explain it, but there's a connection between the happening of the event and my recollection of the event. And you recognize that your recollection pales in comparison, right? Your recollection of the event might be something like a gesture, a facial expression, a smell, a taste, It could be any number of lighting. It could be any number of things. Or it could be very, very detailed, right? It could be, oh, well, first this happened and this happened and da-da-da. Sort of your recollection of the event. But you do recognize that there's always, and you have to recognize this, right? There's always more content information in the event itself than in your recollection of the event, right? There's always, with respect to the facts, the totality of the facts are there in the experience, but you're not going to be able to recall all of that. You can think of the trace as an attempt to not reconstruct the event. You're not trying to reconstruct the truth of what occurred, because there really is no truth in this regard. It's a sense, it's a feeling of what occurred. What you're attempting to do in terms of the utilization of this trace, the utilization of so it's an attenuation, right? It's a tenuous, sort of a very tenuous epistemic condition, is to ask yourself, and this you can prompt the participant, to ask yourself, why is it that I've only recalled this bit of information? Right? Why is it that you, like if I'm talking to the participant now, so I'm going to be the researcher, you're going to be the participant, you know, I appreciate you sharing your story about X with me. Let me ask you, have you ever thought why it is that you've only recalled that bit? Is there other things that you haven't recalled? Or, you know, is there a significance as to why it is that you wanted to disclose this bit? They might not understand initially, and if they don't understand, that's fine. It's part of the deconstructivist approach. You know, that's all I could remember. No problem. The reason this is important is because sometimes there is a tremendous amount of information that's said in not saying. The present that's absent. You can imagine that, I can't even think of an example where this would work. I would need an example where information was communicated as a consequence of what was not said. Information was communicated as a consequence of what was not said. Oh, the only thing I can think of is something like surveillance. So you can imagine that an individual is under surveillance, and the authorities or whoever's surveying the individual sort of already knows, like on the date of, you know, the 15th, we saw you go into the store and steal the keychain. So we have you on video stealing the keychain, but no one was going to arrest you, no one's going to do anything. We have you on no, something more significant than a keychain. Let's say we saw you stealing, you know, $500 out of a register or something. Like you're working at a grocery store or something, and someone steals $500 out of the register, something significant. So this is more interrogation, so it's not really a participant, but you get the idea. And I'm sorry if this example is bad, but I'm trying to capture a really complex concept in something that's concrete. Before I give you the example, just to go back to the concept is the way in which there is a tremendous amount, the absent present, there's a tremendous amount that could be communicated in what's not said. So a lot is being stated, but what's being, it's hard to say it, the epistemic import is placed on what's not said, not what is said. There you go. Oh. So, imagine I'm the interrogator, you're the thief that got away with the $500. Now, I asked you, you know, for some other crime that you've done, let's say this goes back to the recidivism thing, and I have to stay away from criminal justice. I'm sort of comfortable in that paradigm, but I need to sort of force myself out of that. I have to. Otherwise, this is going to be tailored too much to that. So you say, hey, you know, yesterday, imagine yesterday was the 15th. You do anything interesting yesterday? Anything happened that you need to let me know about yesterday? No, nothing happened yesterday. Just a regular day the whole day? Just a regular day the whole day. You didn't do anything? You didn't go to the store? You didn't go shopping or anything? Yeah, you know, I went to the store for a little bit. You want anything you want to tell me about your trip to the store? Nah, you know, I just, you know, picked up some stuff and came back. You can see how much is being communicated by what's not being stated, right? Then when you show the video, here's a video of your hand and, you know, the register in the drawer taking out $500. Oh, that's right. Yeah, oh, I forgot to tell you, man. I didn't mean to do that, blah, blah, blah. Really bad example. I apologize. I can't prep for everything, but you get the idea. Irrespective of whether it's a good example or not, you get the idea. What is absent is the truth of the event, right? This is important in terms of the event. The truth of the event was that you stole $500. The trace is not something that's alien to you. You could make a direct link. Another application of this is the sense that the investigator knows, right? The investigator, this guy's probably lying. It's probably he's lying. Let's say he doesn't have the video, right? This guy's lying. I know he's lying. I'm going to find that video. And once I find that video, I got him. Right? So there's a sense. It's an intuition. It's an intuition. This is the great detective stories. Right? If you're writing mystery, if you're writing detective stories, it's all intuitive and inference and deduction. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of all. But the idea is it's that gut feeling. I have a feeling like there's something that's unstated here. What's present is too obvious. What's present is too, as Heidegger would say, is too ready to hand. And what's absent is the thing that I'm looking for, something with more sustenance. So I don't want to belabor that anymore. Number 7, remember, as a researcher, you are responsible for generalizing your findings. So it's important that the social context informing your participants' use of specific terms accurately reflect the proper sociological context. Otherwise, your generalization will not reflect the proper context. Remember, member checking, right, for assurance. So, and member checking is exactly what I said before. By your use of the term X, did you mean that? Did you mean it in this sense? Yes, I did. No, I didn't. In a more complicated, so that was sort of a superficial level, right? Your sense that the guy's lying, you know, the fact that your sense that the guy's lying is going to force you to go look for more information, and then, I found the tape, right? You are lying. See, there it is. In terms of the individual participant, right? So for the participant, if the participant is looking, quote unquote, looking back, reflecting back on his or her experiences of the past, as we said before, you might not. Let's just flip back really quick so that we can read this. It was number 3. The absent presence of sometimes imperceptible imprints on our words and meaning. The way in which things that are imperceptible affect our words. This is a direct quote, right? Things that are imperceptible affect our words. It affects meaning. And the question is that the event and this trace epistemic understanding, this quasi-empirical, not quasi-empirical, but quasi-epistemic, it's not quite knowledge, I have a sense, I have a feeling, is a condition in which we create meaning. We still produce meaning nonetheless, right? And I don't understand why, people say this all the time, right? I can't think of an example right now, but I don't understand why, I don't understand why I was so affected by some experience. Oh, the PTSD example would be a good one for this, right? I don't understand why it affected me so much, right? Other people were there with me. You know, I had a friend, he was there with me, Tim was there with me, Bob was there with me. We all did the same stuff. And I'm the only one that this is affecting. It's not affecting any of those guys. There's something wrong with me, right? The idea is, in terms of the impression, it's not... The best way to explain this is it's not this cookie-cutter experience where you have a dough. This is why I don't believe in human nature. You have a dough, you have an external impression, the external impression via Locke and tabula rasa and all that other stuff, and, you know, impresses itself on us, and we all are shaped exactly the same. No, that's clearly not the case, and this shouldn't be difficult to understand. Meaning is subjective, right? Meaning is subjective. If you grow up in a hostile environment and it's dog eat dog and everybody's battling for scraps, and someone comes in and they're aggressive and they're very flamboyant, it's like, hey, let me tell you, da 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 da. Okay, this guy, let me gravitate towards this guy because this guy is focused. He's assertive. He's aggressive, but he's not threatening, and I'm going to follow that guy. Other people might see this personality type and flee from it because they think that he's a threat. Oh, he's very loud, you know. The way I was raised, people don't talk that loud, and people don't move that way, the way he holds his body, the way he stands, the way he uses his hands. I'm interpreting his gestures, his gesticulation, as aggressive. Is the meaning right for one and not right for the other? Is the interpretation and the meaning derived from that impression right for the person who says that it's threatening, and wrong for the person who says that it's familiar and it's a demonstration of leadership? Who's right, who's wrong? They're both right. They're both right. And that's the point, right? This is why it's so perfectly attuned to a deconstructivist approach, is that it's not appropriate to say that one interpretation is right and one isn't. What's important is for the person who's speaking, for the person who's projecting his voice or moving his arms or what have you, to recognize, hey, despite the fact that I don't feel that what I'm doing, the way I'm carrying myself is aggressive, I have to be aware of my audience. People have different lifestyles. People come from different cultures. People have different upbringings. Some people have traumatic upbringings, and I don't want to be an imprint that references them back to something traumatic in their life. So while I'm not going to be, this is me personally, while I'm not going to be the type of person like, hi, how are you? Is everything okay? I'm definitely not going to be that. You don't want to sort of defang the individual. You also want to make sure that you're cognizant that, no, I have to be aware of my body. I have to be aware of myself. I have to be aware of my tone. I have to be aware of these things. Why? Because interpretations will vary. So for the individual who is suffering from an experience where other people aren't suffering, it's not to say that the individual is weaker than others for any number of reasons. It's a question of understanding what is it probably about, as we said before, we are born into. What is it about his or her prior experience? Having nothing, if we're talking about the military here, having nothing to do with the military, having nothing to do with trauma services or the social services even. Social service can be very traumatic. I would imagine social service PTSD would be high as well. I mean, you're there with all types of trauma as well. Having nothing to do with the job, what is it about their personal life prior to the job that might affect them? It could be the case that it's not just the experience itself. It's not just about that particular event, but that there's traces of something else that's informing how they interpret that imprint of the event. The event had an initial imprint on it, and it's not on the individual. And it's not just the event itself, but it's a trace of something else in their life, maybe affiliated or not affiliated with their job function, that is affecting them. And this is why you need, psychology and psychiatry. We aren't, qualitative methodologists aren't trained for this. It's not appropriate for you to delve into that, because that's for psychologists to do, psychiatrists to do. It is important to recognize, though, that a person's understanding of his or her life experience and the meaning that's derived from interactions with others, interactions with institutions and such, are going to be as various as they are people, and it's not for us to impose a proper mode of interpretation as much as it is a quest for us, and this the qualitative methodologist does do. The quest is try to understand how and why did you interpret it that way? Completely fair question. How do you make sense of your experience? Completely appropriate question. These questions and the answers that you get will never be formulaic. It cannot possibly be formulaic. It's going to be unique to that individual and that individual alone, and thus it's going to give us better insight into any number of factors. The phenomena itself, the lived experience of the individual, the existential experience of having experienced some set of circumstances and such. So, number 8, lastly, deconstruction happens in the event that produces and this is what I've been talking about, this is a direct quote, right? Deconstruction happens in the event that produces the participant's interpretation of terms, concepts, such and such. So, the example is, the always already gains interpretational content. So, I have been born into a community where Derrida's deconstructivist approach has already existed. I've internalized, I've read, I've understood Derrida's, not fully understood, but I have a good grasp on Derrida's deconstructivist approach. I have contributed new applications to Derrida's deconstructivist approach via also the publication from Routledge. The book is amazing. So whatever the book is, I remember it was a Routledge book. It's Thinking with Theory and Qualitative Research. It's a phenomenal book. It's a phenomenal book. In association with the book and my existing reading, I'm now presenting this lecture series. And I'm adding information that has never been articulated to my knowledge before. This is the first time it's been articulated within the context that I'm articulating it. When I pass, literally, when my biology is no more, I have added to the social milieu, if you will, right? There's new content information for this community, and a new generation of scholars, which is who I'm working so fervently for. A new generation of scholars is going to matriculate in a nexus that contains remnants of my contribution, and you know that's important, right? So that in relationship to the event being now specifically, so that you can really see this, right? The event being this instance of me presenting this lecture series. Now, I recognize that the event is going to, I want to be exact. Deconstruction happens in the event that produces the interpretation. The event now is going to produce an interpretation. Oh, I think Dr. Campbell is doing this because it's all about his ego, and he wants, you know, he just wants to feed his ego because he's, you know, he's an egomaniac. He's a narcissist, right? So narcissistic personality. He's the type of personality that comes up here and just talks all day, and he wants everybody to, you know, be focused on him. Is that true? Of me personally, no. But is that interpretation of me inappropriate? Is it wrong? No. I mean, a person's entitled to that interpretation for any number of experiences. It's the use of that interpretation that's problematic. And if they use that interpretation to then subjugate me, to oppress me, to dehumanize me, to put me in a situation where I might not be able to get recognition for contributions as such, yeah, that's problematic. But the interpretation in and of itself, no, that's completely up to you. So that the idea is that simple recognition. And this seems so simple, but, you know, usually we end with something profoundly complex. One of the things that I love about Derrida's deconstructivist approach is, you know, every time I go back to it, and I might end up just doing, now that I think about it, a lecture series on him and his work specifically, because I am fascinated by it. It's the simple stuff. Keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Because there's genius, there's complexity in the simple. There's difficulty, there's profundity in the simple. It's that contradictory narrative, right? It's the realization that our interpretation of events is a consequence of the event's ability to produce interpretation. I'll say that again. Our interpretation of the event, the way in which we see the event, the way in which we feel the event, the way in which we recall the event and have a trace of understanding from the event, is a condition of what is inherent to the event itself. And that's key. What is inherent to the event itself is its ability to produce interpretations. And we recognize, and this is the genius of the deconstructivist model, is that interpretation by definition is subjective. It's not going to be a homogeneous interpretation, right? Events produce interpretations, obviously. There are two sides to every story, obviously. One person has one side to the story, another person has another side to the story. The more people you have, the more interpretations you have. But we're still talking about one and the same event. And that's the genius of it, right? So the idea is, with your qualitative analysis, recognize the importance of the event and the event's ability to produce various interpretations. And you might, in that recognition, this would be very good, and I'll end on this point, rather than looking for participants who you might think would have interesting stories, maybe look for events that you think produce multifaceted interpretations. There are certain events that the interpretation is pretty much going to be fixed. The things that come to my mind are rather graphic, right? No, there isn't really any other way to interpret this phenomena other than this way. That's what happened. Whereas there are other experiences, there are other events that individuals have where there are a plethora of interpretational differences. And the more interpretational differences that they are with respect to a given event, that makes events of that type interesting, lastly then, it leads us to what really is probably, what would make for great contemporary qualitative research, and I don't even know if they have this, is a typological distinction of events. Right? If you follow this down to sort of its root, it would make one believe that we are we're equivocating in our use of the term. We are potentially equivocating, maybe even Derrida, right? I mean, shout out to Derrida. He's not no longer here, but shout out to Derrida. But even probably Derrida might have been equivocating in the use of the term event, because there might be, under this account, with respect to everything that I've said up until this point, there might be typological distinctions in events. Those events where the interpretation is pretty much fixed. I'm going to have to use the example, you have to forgive me, rape. There is no interpretational disagreement or ambiguity with respect to rape. The event was this, consent was not given, the only interpretation is that, period, right? Psychopathy aside and all that other stuff. But then there's other events like my trip to Disney was great. My trip to Disney was expensive. My trip to Disney changed my life. My trip to, something like that. So there are other events where the interpretation is multifaceted. Obviously, the two are different, which leads us to a recognition, because of just this immediate duality, that there are potential poles, which means that there's a possibility for a typological distinction in how we articulate events, which means we would need to formalize the typology of events. So, graduate students, I just gave you a gem. That sounds like a book publication to me, because I don't know that anyone's ever written that. I don't know, there might be, I know about event ontology, but, that if that interests you in any way, then run with it. So, I'm going to end this first section, section 1.0 of my lecture series into Introduction to Qualitative Methods. With that, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Thank you for watching my videos. Have a good day.